Happy Tuesday, everybody. My name's Aaron. I'm the co-founder, managing director here at BWG Connect. We're a giant networking knowledge sharing group. I try to talk to 20 to 30 organizations a week to understand, hey, what are the biggest pain points, strategies, things that are working for them, things they'd like to talk about. And when the same topics come up over and over again, we host an event like this. I'm also asking everybody who's working for you and who's not. And when the same people come up over and over again, those are the guests we invite on to kind of answer all the questions in this space that have been popping up. We do like it to be as educational and informational as possible. So we have the chat open, the Q&A is open. We encourage you to drop any questions you have along the way in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll answer those as real time as possible. So don't hesitate, drop them in there. We'll get them answered as soon as we can. The other thing is we're starting just a few minutes after the hour, just so everybody knows we're going to wrap up with a few minutes left in the hour at least as well. We're going to give you plenty of time to get on to your next meeting without being late. So no worries, it'll be done before 1 p.m. Eastern time. And with that, you know, the idea of email marketing, it seemed like it peaked and then it started to ebb, and now it's starting to come back pretty rapidly. And so I had a lot of questions around it, its effectiveness, but especially in regulated industries as a whole and what you can do and what you can't do. A lot of questions in this space. And so we've got some great friends over at Coalition, as well as Technologies, as well as Omnisend, who's here to answer the questions, talk about this space, and see how much we can pick their brains over the next hour. But Jordan, I'm going to kick it over to you first. If you want to do a brief intro on yourself, and then you can kick it to Greg, and then we'll kind of jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Sure. Yeah. Name is Jordan Brannon, president and co-founder at Coalition Technologies. We are a full-service agency. We've got about 250 full-time team members and about 100 or so working for us on a contract basis, creating visual content and copy and all sorts of other things too. So we work with brands in every one of their pain points and hopefully help turn them into something that is a lot less painful and a lot more golden. And so excited to talk about this particular topic, since it is one of those areas where I think it ebbs and flows. You find a hot channel and everybody starts to talk about that hot channel. And but when you need things to be solid and you need things to really work, email, SMS is an amazing place to be focused. So Greg, I'll kick to you.
Thanks, Jordan. So Greg Zakowicz here, senior e-commerce expert at Omnisend. For those unfamiliar, we're an email and SMS marketing automation platform. Been around for well over a decade. So Aaron, you were talking about kind of ebbs and flows of email. I've been in email marketing for 19 years, which is, to me, unbelievable to even think about. I kind of stumbled my way into it. But I've also, when I was doing consulting, I've worked with multiple companies in these kind of quote unquote vice industries, some extremely large global companies and some smaller ones. So it's always interesting to see what they can and can't do. And you learn a lot by doing that stuff too. So should be a really good conversation there. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So where is the best place to kind of like kick this off? In my mind, it is this importance around email marketing. What are you seeing taking place right now? I was kind of surprised that it started popping up. And then I think just digging into it and talking to a lot of different brands, the cost and the effectiveness and everything. So maybe like why it's important to be doing email marketing, the trends that you're seeing in this space right now. And we can then shift that into, well, you know, the compliance space and regulations, things that we want to tailor into this call as a whole.
Yeah. I'll let you go first, Greg, on that one, but I've got some thoughts too.
Perfect. So I get super long-winded, so you guys feel free to jump in and cut me off as you choose. So
I'll play the Oscar back noise.
Perfect. Email is, to me, super interesting because you're right, Aaron. It's not kind of as cool as you get these up-and-coming channels, right? And not up-and-coming anymore, but like, you get the hot ones, and that's where people throw gas on the fire. So you have TikTok marketing and then Instagram for a while and Snapchat and all these things. And it's just not as sexy as looking at cool visuals and videos and stuff like that, but it's always performed well. I think now we've seen it over the last couple of years with, we use these blanket statements of like algorithm changes, but it's a first party channel. It's a consumer saying, yes, I want to hear from your brand. Go ahead and send me some ads. And it is expected. And that's the one thing we're continuously seeing. Last year we saw open rates increase again as 26% last year across the board. You know, so we're looking at that and going, okay, when people go to their inbox, they are actively looking for a brand communication. They go there and hopefully the subject line is good enough to get them intrigued. But if they're intrigued and they're going to open up. Now you factor that in with just general economic factors. So, you know, all the news today is tariffs, but we've seen consumer confidence declining, geopolitical issues. But the one thing that we've seen kind of evolve last 18, 24 months is kind of a drop in or hesitancy in consumer spending, right? Trading down, looking for value. And that impacts consumers, it impacts brands as well, though. So brands are looking to maximize ROI for the marketing channels. And we saw it during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, fewer overall orders, but AOV skyrocketed almost 35, 40%. So fewer orders to go around, but those people that are spending in one place. That's where for that convergence of first party channels combined with general, you know, economic factors, it makes it a super interesting channel right now.
Yeah, I think I would call out, like, I think I had talking with our email team lead, and he had a opined something which I thought was really insightful and was exciting for me. He said email and SMS are bellwethers of your other marketing channel, and he said, like, if you want to know how healthy you are in marketing and in sort of your branding and all of those things, look to your email performance. And he said it's an amazing channel in terms of generating revenue. There's all sorts of good things to say about it, but he said the insight that it provides about good strategy, about good marketing, about good sales strategy is really invaluable. And so much of what happens and goes right in email is because you've figured out something that's going right elsewhere. That doesn't take away from email or SMS on their own at all. But I think, again, it's just one of those spots where when we approach email and SMS as sort of a secondary thing to a top of funnel effort, you know, we want to launch TikTok this year. We're going to go all in on TikTok. And if your email is suffering, it maybe it tells you you've lost the pulse of who it is that you're going after, who your customer is, why and when they're willing to spend, what they're willing to buy. And I think that was a thing that gets me excited, because I'm a top of funnel guy. I came in to e-commerce from the SEO and paid search front over 20 years ago now. So yeah, to me, I think when I look at like 2025, and there's so much that's happening right now that creates a sense of chaos for digital marketers, that ability to sort of really understand and guide and help direct your customer and also put some meat on the bones for your other marketing channels through email, I think is really, really exciting.
Yeah, interesting. The bellwether. I love that.
Yeah.
Right. The idea, if it's not working, is not only is it might be the content that's in there, but also might be who you're targeting and who you're going after. And it might just be an indication you maybe launched a new product and you're completely targeting the wrong people for it. But I think that's another whole webinar we could go down. But a reminder that people drop questions in the chat or the Q&A and we'll get to them. When we're talking about how important it is as a whole, one of the things that we wanted to talk about in this webinar was just around, you know, regulated industries and the laws and trying to understand them. Randomly people getting shut off by their ESPs. There's a lot of questions out there, especially in these industries. It's super easy if you're selling bubble gum, right? But the reality is when you get into these regulated industries, just having come from one, OTC pharma, there's a lot of different stuff that you have to think about. So, you know, I'd love to chat a little bit about, you know, the compliance piece and what you're seeing in this space and things that people should be thinking about. Anyways, I'll kind of open up the conversation there. And just remember, those of you who have joined, if you have questions specifically around this, drop in the chat in the Q&A and we'll get them answered for sure.
I might jump in early. I think we work with a pretty broad spectrum of regulated brands and categories. We have some that are more what we would call like a vices type category. So recreational CBD type products, alcohol, you know, guns, firearms, things like that, which have some regulation. And then certainly I think regulated more on the healthcare or finance side of things. So thinking, you know, cryptocurrencies or financial advice and advisors. So we kind of work with that whole spectrum. And I think there's some fundamental differences there. You have to understand sort of what the government says you need to do. That's sort of one layer. You have to work with providers who understand that requirement, because that can be a gotcha as well. And you also have to understand sort of expectations for regulated categories from consumers, because I think that's actually one of the biggest things is consumers often have high expectations for the brands they work with for these more sensitive areas. And they want to see that show up in the way that you handle their data, the way that you communicate with them from a marketing standpoint. And so if I am, like you said, selling bubblegum, we do a lot in women's fashion, health and beauty, all those sorts of categories. People tend to be a little more open-handed about personalization, about segmentation, about automation. But in regulated categories, there's a lot of sensitivity and some strong reactions if you're not really doing those things well.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, you said expectations. I look at standards, right? So fair or not, you're going to be held to higher standards. And if you look at someone like just from an email, so Omnisend, right? Email, SMS, and you have your compliance regulations and you have your terms of service type things. And I'm not a lawyer, just throwing that out there, but uh, you know, you got to look at terms of service. So if you look at a different email provider, it says, okay, you can do this, but you have to hit X, Y, Z, and you can't do A, B, C. Right. You could still be in compliance, but you're against their terms of service, then you get shut off. The fact is, even if you comply with those things, you're probably going to have a lower threshold, lower margin of error, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, selling, let's stick with bubble gum here. So we're selling some gum and you blast an entire list or something and you're not following, best deliverability practices. Well, the ESP wants you to follow those things. If you are selling gun parts or something like that, or CBD, and you do that and your deliverability impacts that company, they're going to come down, chances are, more heavy-handed on you. And it's just a reality of it. And I think if you have the understanding that, yeah, I've got higher expectations on me, my room for error is smaller, that's how you need to approach it. And you just start building your program from there or optimize the program from there. So I think it is challenging finding, like, no one reads terms of service, right? I opened up Zoom today. There's a terms of service. I have no idea what it says. But when you're relying on driving revenue from your business, you need to look at those a little more closely, figure out, hey, what can I do and what can I not do? And it's not always fun to do, but and that's where having a rep, right? So, you're working with your company, Jordan or Aaron, right? Talk to a rep at the company and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Can I do it with you guys?
Yeah. And I think it also, like, so is it we have other brands that are doing it versus is this something that's actually covered in our terms of service is a big difference, because we've had that happen a lot with some of our partners who are maybe more generic in terms of audience focus. I won't name names, but where they've made that commitment, like, yeah, we have other brands doing this and selling the same product. And then, 2 months in, you've migrated your email list, you've got all of your personalization set up, you've got your team, your email templates, all of the flows, everything's perfect, you're tied into your CRM. And then all of a sudden you get that notice that says, hey, you've got X number of days to move off platform. It's a violation of terms of service. And we get that sort of, that's actually a pretty good source of business for us. Unfortunately, we have people who are calling us in that circumstance, and we have great partners like Omnisend we can direct to. But really getting into the nitty gritty, is this a salesperson? Yes. Or is this a terms of service legal backing from that particular SaaS provider? Is it a yes from them as well? There is a bit of some of the bigger companies we work with on the platform side tend to have certain financial obligations based on the country where they're headquartered, which play a role in how those terms of service are written, and then have a pretty direct impact, especially in these regulated categories. And so I think it's good to sort of understand the lay of the land that way, because it often is the first and biggest pain point you'll experience in regulated categories with email and with SMS.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, if I'm going to evaluate, even on an annual basis, maybe it's just a brand new one, my ESP, there's the two sides to it. There's the compliance regulation standpoint from like the governmental side of you know, a lot of times people are looking at that saying, hey, I meet all of these, I pass all of these regulations. That's important to adhere to. But I think, you know, even Greg, like you're saying, like when you then assume that that is the guidelines that the ESPs are going after and using, but they're not. They've set up their own terms of service that are probably buffered a little bit on the conservative side of those regulations, so they're not bumping up against them. Am I reading that right? And then the next piece is, so that is me onboarding an ESP, right? And what does it look like? And that's a mess, but I'm just kind of shrinking this one down to ESP. The next phase is what happens if. And so what what are you thinking about when you're guiding, you know, this could be for either Jordan or Greg, like you're guiding a brand around when they're evaluating ESP and they're not all the same. Like that's, I think would be the terms of service would be pretty much the same across all of them, but you're saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would look at it. So I'm not in sales, right? But I would look at it from this standpoint. One is, right, the company, the ESP, whatever provider you're going to work with, their goal is to protect their company, right? So of course they want to increase sales, but they're going to do things to protect them. So, you know, hey, if we get 50,000 companies coming to Omnisend and they're all going to be terrible for us, well, it's going to impact our business, it's going to impact other clients. So the company is going to be taking that standpoint. From the, you know, the compliance standpoint, how I would look at it and say, okay, to your point, Jordan, do you have other companies setting this? And, you know, we would say, hey, we have these other companies that are in the same area as you, right? These are the compliance checkpoints that we built into our platform, you know, TCPA, GDPR, whatever it is to help you, you know, to stay compliant with the law. And then our terms of service is this, and we're going to work with you and say, okay, from a deliverability standpoint, these are our expectations. If a company runs afoul of those things, and maybe they do it accidentally or they do it intentionally,
Yeah.
those are two very different approaches, right? So accidentally, we'll work with you. We'll say, okay, this is what we did wrong. This is where we kind of got in trouble for it. This is how we correct it. We start to plan out those corrective actions for it. You know, if you are running afoul on purpose because you're just trying to churn and burn, different conversation. But
Yeah.
that's an example of, you know, the company trying to protect itself there. So I know Omnisend, you know, we work with clients hand in hand. You can talk to a salesperson; they'll show you exactly how to work with them. We're friendly like that. Not all companies are. And Jordan, I'll turn it over to you, but you mentioned it before, right? Is it a sales yes or is it you know, a non-sales yes? And those
A
are two
business, yes,
very
yeah.
big different things.
Yeah, and I would say like too, I think in that space of terms of service and sort of business backing, one area we pay attention to is when we see some sort of transition in ownership or ownership structure or investment structure. That's often a trigger moment for a platform. You'll get that sort of sneaky, like, hey, we've updated our terms and service. If you keep using us, we're going to keep, you know, this is something you're opting into. But when someone goes, you know, from privately held to, you know, publicly traded, when they take on a publicly traded investor buys them or buys a specific chunk of them, you can inherit sort of these terms of service switches. And so I would just say, like, as an agency, that's one of the things we will look at is, you know, hey, we got that notice. We're going to pay attention to it because we've got 100 clients. We need to figure out exactly like what this says. And so you want to have a partner like that, but also when you see those things happen, do kind of look for those. And I think maybe, Greg, on your point, you pulled on the thread a little bit. You know, be aware of what is industry specific, what is you specific, and what is your customer specific that could run afoul of a term of service. With some of our brands in sort of the healthcare space where there's HIPAA compliance obligations, unintentionally in terms of the data they're porting into the email platform or they're adding in to help with segmentation, you can run afoul of some of those compliance regulations. You can incorporate in a field of that just really you have no business sort of bringing into a mass market email list. And you want to be really careful about that because, again, you potentially are creating a liability for yourself and running afoul of terms of service that exist and would otherwise have protected you and you would have been able to work within. We've just kind of a specific example. We had a client not so long ago who onboarded with us in their email marketing platform, had plain text social security numbers because of their CRM integration, which was just sort of a crazy thing. That they existed in the CRM was also really troubling, but it was sort of instantly like a hot potato thing. We were like, we need to freeze. We're restricting our team's access until you guys get this cleaned up and you know, it required some work. But Again, if you're in a regulated category and industry, there's usually something about your customer which needs to be held a little more carefully, and you need to think about how you use that in your marketing a little more cautiously, and then how you structure that data in your email marketing platform, in your SMS platform, who has access to it, what permissions are you using, all of those things you have to start thinking about, because they could be that trigger event for a terms of service violation or some sort of compliance issue that comes up.
What does it look like? And again, you drop questions in as you see fit. Everybody in the audience, drop them in the chat or the Q&A. I'll just kind of field some of them that have popped up. Is what happens in the best recourse for when you get a violation of TOS? What are the next steps? Right? Like,
Talk to
my
her.
guess is hopefully ahead of time you've prepped some kind of a relationship so you can have a conversation. But when that happens, or if it happens, hopefully it doesn't, like, what would be timing? And then, yeah, anyways, how do we answer it?
For us, you would get the notification. If you have an account manager, contact the account manager. They might be proactively reaching out to you for those things as well. But just be honest, right? Have those conversations. Say, okay, this is what happened. Maybe you didn't know what happened. Hey, how did this happen? And then what's their plan for remediation, right? And you can have that conversation. If you don't have an account manager, maybe you're not friendly with the account manager, contact customer support and use them to diagnose that as well. Chances are, if it is a accidental one or a minor one, but like, hey, heads up for you, you ran into this. All you got to do is this, right? Support, or they'll just have someone from the company reach out to you. It's like, oh, our XYZ person or whoever will reach out to you and we'll try to mitigate that issue. So we're pretty transparent over here. So if you, again, intentional versus unintentional, severe versus non-severe, right? Situations matter, but generally we'll reach out as someone as a person. But I would say if you get a notification like that and no one's reached out to you, just reach out to support or whatever direct contact you have. And we try to make it as simple as that.
Yeah, I double click on that for any sort of marketing channel or platform. That the account rep that you have, they're usually kind of the annoying salesperson, after you've signed, like, hey, there's a new feature, would you like to upgrade your account? That can happen, like, and you sort of treat them that way, and you sort of just ignore that email, but save those contact details, because they often really are a great resource when there's, especially in regulated spaces, you're going to have more need to contextualize what you're doing, how you're using a tool. Customer complaints or high bounce rates, things like that, are maybe a little more common in regulated and vice spaces than they are elsewhere. And so just you want to have that person that you can go to, because automation and automated systems are somewhat impersonal and ignore context, and so being able to talk to somebody is usually a good way of avoiding sort of a real disastrous occurrence. So that's a really good tip. I think if you do run afoul more significantly of a terms of service type of thing, or Greg called this out, one of the big triggers we see for account reviews with some platforms is really subpar performance. You really don't want to just sort of move on as if continuing to do the same thing is going to be okay, even if you get back, in with the same provider, you even move to another provider. Those high bounce rates, or a particular high spam complaint rate or something like that is going to always trigger a review for a platform that is trying to send tens of millions of emails a day or hundreds of thousands of text messages an hour. Like they have to be mindful of some of these things. And so be careful there. Understand what it was that triggered that, especially in our regulated spaces. I think there's a bit of I don't know what it is. There's sort of a Wild West sort of ethos that, like, anything goes until the marshal shows, like, and then all of a sudden, you have to sort of figure out a way to mature. And I think some of that is just sort of the maybe the competitors that are in the space. I see a lot with our more mature regulated brands. They have these really shooting from the hip sort of companies that run afoul of everybody, and they come and they go, but it sort of creates a bit of a culture in that space of, like, we're going to just do what we can to make this work. And we'll see a lot more questionably acquired lists showing up, not well vetted, not opted in. The data is bad, so that it's clearly it's been supplemented with an unreliable source. And so again, like, as a regulated brand, work with team members, with providers, with companies like ours who can help vet those things, because that will be the thing that provides scalability and predictability in email, which is what we most love about email, is that you can grow it, and it tends to perform at a really high threshold. And the sooner you sort of switch away from Wild West mindset to a bit more of a mature mindset to kind of work in your space, you'll find that has a lot of success.
Yeah. Yeah. If I could add two things on that as well. So that's you know, you'll get a pretty good sense of how your provider views you as a company when those things happen, right? So we talked about, hey, you might get an email that says, hey, you're in violation of terms of service, fix it or get out. You have 30 days or 15 days or whatever. And maybe it's just cold blanketed, and that is a business protecting itself, versus a company that maybe wants to protect itself, but also cares about the success of the end user, which is you. So if they say, hey, you're in violation of terms of service, hey, reach out to XYZ or whatever, and you can get a pretty good sense of how friendly that company is with, or how earnest they are maybe in having them resolve the issue with you, rather than just telling you to resolve it and then help you grow from there. So I think that's a really good kind of thing to notice as you're approaching. And then the second thing I would say is, if you're looking at other providers, whether you're doing yearly or you're just not satisfied with your current provider, ask them the question when you're going through the sales process. Hey, can you give me an example of a company like ours that maybe ran afoul with terms of service, and how'd you go ahead and remediate that? And you get a pretty good sense of how they might work with the customer then, to figure out, hey, is this someone I want to port all my contact info over, go through the setup stage? Am I going to be comfortable that if I run into a foul, they are going to be, they're going to care for me, or they're going to help me along that? So I think those are two really good areas you can look at to see what that future relationship might actually look like for you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we've actually seen pretty kind of, I guess, tooting the Omnisend horn. We've seen that just as we've had these sort of migration questions. We'll bring up the specific thing we think is getting someone off-platformed from one provider, and then sort of vet that with Omnisend, like, hey, what is the issue that you see here? How would your platform respond? Is this resolvable? Is this, what if this had been preventable? Or is this just a non-issue? And it seems like it's, again, that sort of touchy, ambiguously gray terms of service application kind of coming up. And I think that's been really one of the things why with Omnisend, especially, we kind of lean towards you guys with the regulated categories. There's a lot more clarity. It seems like there's more maturity in this particular space.
Yeah, awesome. A couple questions that I want to get into here. They're coming in. And again, for those of you who joined halfway through, drop the question in the chat or the Q&A and we'll get to them. Do you have a most common reason why brands would get booted from a platform? And the other one gets into, what are some of the laws you mentioned that could accidentally trip to, bringing in non-compliance? So I guess two questions there we want to get into.
I could probably speak to sort of maybe the boot question, since we deal with a lot more of the interchange, I think, between platforms. One is those sort of metric triggers that Greg touched on. We've seen certain platform providers seem like they maybe have a little sensitivity around things like bounce rate or spam complaint rates, like that, from communication that goes out from an account in a regulated space. And so that seems to be one of the automations that we see trigger a lot. Sometimes we'll see what appears to have been like a manual review based on the particular product that you sell. How that happens seems to be a little more interesting. It doesn't seem to happen a lot for small brands. So what we found, I think, just in our experience, is that little brands tend to get ignored until they get big enough that you can't anymore. And so there's, I think, where a lot of regulated brands get frustrated is they're like, we've been working with unnamed email platform for 5 years. We're now at a point where we really feel like we're doing well, and all of a sudden you're telling us that we have to leave, and we have to leave now. And so I think there is some mindfulness, again, in being prepared about, like, hey, long term, is this a place that really wants us here? If we're doing well on the bounce rate, if we're really avoiding spam issues, are we are we still sort of in that gray area of terms of service? Because again, if you start sending a lot of emails, start doing more on the SMS, you mature there, you develop more meaningful flows. The last thing you want is right when you feel like you're hitting your stride to sort of get that, gotcha email in the inbox that says, hey, you've got a countdown timer running now.
Yeah, I would say the metric piece is big for an email provider, right? So you can tell a lot about a company's strategy growth through deliverability.
Mm.
So, you get a new client comes on and their spam rates and their bounce rates are through the roof. I can tell you pretty quickly whether you just bought an email list, you scraped an email list, you rented an email list versus organically growing an email list with engaged contacts. So I would say that's probably the biggest part of, hey, you're running foul of terms of service because most email providers will say, hey, you can't bring in bot lists, but no one ever, I mean, very few people ever admit to it. They'll just like, nope, I grew it, right? We know what's going on, but that poor deliverability not only hurts the company, but good luck recovering from it, right? So changing email providers does not fix the deliverability issue. That stuff follows you around, and it takes a lot of work and effort getting out of that. And I would say that's probably the biggest thing, right? Are you collect? I mean, just GDPR in general. Are you collecting it the right way, right? You've run into compliance issues there, but uh, your list health is going to tell us you know, a lot about how you're actually growing your list and running your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Just a couple things. One is, are there laws that you'd highlight that people accidentally trip that are just the most common? And then I'd love to get into like email optimization. So I think it's been a great flow of, hey, here's things that can happen. Here's the industries that need to be concerned. Here's what could happen. Here's, how you need to deal with it. And, here's things you can think about. So let's tackle this one, but then let's get into like an optimization piece. Like, how do you prevent it from happening, or how do you make it as effective as possible in these regulated industries?
Yeah. Maybe on the law thing, I think there's obviously a lot of new privacy regulation happening. So I think, that's the one to be really sensitive to. Look at what your state locale is, where you're actually sort of based, pay special attention to those. Look at the big states where you have a lot of people on your list. That's going to be another place to pay attention to. If you're domestic, GDPR, if you're focusing on a sort of a multinational EU audience as well. But yeah, I mean, that's really like a big trigger, especially California right now. We're seeing some new, if anybody's familiar with sort of ADA lawsuits and how they've worked with e-commerce brands over the last few years, we're seeing efforts by attorneys to sort of carve out sort of information capture from customers visiting your website, getting ported into your marketing funnels, using like wiretap laws from years ago, and trying to make a case that there's violations happening that can kind of create a new ADA sort of industry to focus on. And so I'd say the privacy piece is probably the biggest one. And especially if you're in a medical category or you are emailing about medical things, start to be attentive to HIPAA type regulations. So if you are dealing with someone sensitive, health related or health issue related, so it's just your content and as your marketing focus, you're going to capture some opportunities to violate HIPAA. And so really do start to pay attention to that, what you're putting on your email platform, what you're sending out, who has access. I think that'd be really a big piece there.
Yeah, I don't need to add anything to the law side. I think Jordan knocked that one out of the park. I'd be happy to chime in on the email optimization side. I mean, there's so many things we could probably spend an hour on this just between the three of us talking as well.
Yeah, I want to
I
get
would
into the
say,
optimization piece. I would
Yeah.
love that because I
Yeah.
think, from some of those key takeaways, that we're just pulling apart, like this is going to be key because there's going to be a lot of people sitting out there right now. Hey, I haven't violated anything yet. I really like my service provider, my TOS. I'm good with them. Like, how do I optimize this without triggering anything?
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'll give you the very quick caveat of keep a good, it's best practice, not an optimization, but keep a healthy email list, right?
Yeah.
More to the inbox, more opens, more clicks, more conversions. Simple as that. I say from an actual optimization standpoint, the one trend we're seeing, I've been talking about this for a while now, but I think it's come really pronounced is social proof inside of
Mm.
emails. We're seeing, I mean, it's so big everywhere. You're seeing it on social media ads, right? Having the star review right in the ad itself. This is big. So I would look for any sort of social proof you can add to your messages. That could be using a testimonial. It could be using a featuring top sellers or customer favorites in your messages, especially automated messages, but really reinforcing. Social proof is more to guide people where to go. So if I'm new to your brand, give me your best sellers, give me your customer favorites. It's a jumping off place for me. If I'm familiar with your brand, it is okay, these are potentially new products, or it's going to reinstill trust in you. And the outside of that, I would say focus on your value adds, find out where your competitive differentiators are, and build those into your template. Do you have free shipping? Do you have free returns? Or price match guarantees, customer satisfaction, 24/7 support, whatever it is. Build those somewhere into your email template. So every single time someone opens, they remember those things because people are going to price shop. It's the nature of the business, right? So if I remember those three things and I'm price shopping on someone else and maybe they don't have free returns or expedited returns, I've got that memorized. And those things over the course of time will pay dividends for you.
Yeah, yeah, I would call out. I think that the social proof, but what we've seen really be successful, and partially because we have the advantage of being sort of multi-channel in our support, is the crossover. So if we're carrying someone's marketing channel, what the top of funnel engagement was into the email and the SMS follow-up, we're seeing a lot of success. And so if someone is coming in off of an Instagram reel or a YouTube short or a TikTok being able to port in similar content and make that a part of your email strategy, even if you're using a GIF or a GIF to sort of help support that experience and presenting sort of a similar piece of content that maybe is advancing in the funnel. That's been a real awesome spot of success for us. We see a lot better engagement. We see sort of desirable conversion actions happening, and it really does play to a real healthy campaign. I would also say like that the premium UGC piece is something that's really important. So getting that authentic voice, but it feels like a customer like me who is sharing some of that content either through a written testimonial or again that sort of call out to a video testimonial that's available. That really does make a big difference for regulated. I think the only other thing I would call out would be that in regulated spaces we see negative reasons playing a bigger role in whether or not someone is going to engage with your email content. So hesitancies, basically. Again, in women's fashion, our clients seem to be successful when they can sort of capture a moment of interest. And there's not a lot of safeguards. People are just willing to sort of, I don't mean safeguards, but they'll just impulsively click, in something that's sort of easy and light. On the flip side, in a regulated space, when we're dealing with, weight loss medication, or we're dealing with something that is used for therapeutic pain relief, or we're using something that is recreational, but again, maybe they're just a little more sensitive about people knowing about. We see sort of these like behaviors that almost tell us that there's a alarm bell going off before they choose to click, before they choose an action. There's a little bit more hesitancy. And so in your email content and in your campaign, make sure you're addressing some of those hesitancies. UGC is great to do that, but also strategically kind of play them in. Like, again, I think Greg mentioned things like free shipping and your returns policy. Those are great, and they work really well in some of our normal categories. But things like how you handle my customer information, my purchase order history, my purchasing history might actually be as significant as a free shipping offer. What does your customer record look like? How are you protecting my data there can actually be a really effective thing to call out. And you'll see a lot of brands that are doing regulated well will have those sort of mentions, and they'll have tested that those are successful. And I do, maybe one more. Greg hit this. You cannot run a successful email campaign with bad sort of deliverability performance. Like you can have the best content strategy, the best audience segmentation, all of those things, but if you are getting high bounce rates, if the ISPs are deciding you're not a trustworthy sender, it won't matter. I mean, it just does not matter how good your email campaign is. You are having the door shut. It's sort of like we have the door-to-door salespeople. The door is just never going to open to you. And so you won't know if the sales pitch is good, if the price is good, if the product is good, if the marketing is good, because the door just isn't open. So really be attentive to that.
As someone who's done door-to-door sales before, gotta get the door open, right? And if it's
Yep.
raining out, it doesn't help you
Yep.
in email like it does in sales. So the one thing I just wanted to chime in to add there. So say, CBD, adult toys, whatever it could be,
Yeah.
right? if everyone's offering free shipping, it's like, okay, do I need to mention? I still would. But most of these companies, not all, but most of these companies will have like an FAQ section on the site that will then say, are your products shipped discreetly? And most of them will say yes, but not all of them do, right? And if you ship discreetly, and that's just kind of a commonplace for you, that's one of those things you can add on there as well, right?
Yeah.
So free discreet shipping or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
look for those areas.
So a couple more questions here. Is there too much personalization in email marketing for restricted categories? And then another one, do you have a cheat sheet for evaluating third-party vendors who do email marketing and what to look for before partnering with them in terms of privacy? Asking for healthcare industry. So
I could say for us, when we're looking at email platforms, so more on the technical side of things, we do. Part of that is actually just sort of know who we want to work with usually. So if we're onboarding a new client and they're, I won't say names again, but certain large email marketing platforms, and I know that this is an issue, we'll call that out as part of our initial consulting. We usually will bring it up several times because we're always the one left holding the bag if there's a surprise. You're getting the boot off of unnamed partner, and we have to end up on Omnisend. We'll call that out at the top of the conversation, and in the sales process, we'll also reiterate it during our initial strategy. And if we get a new point of contact from your team assigned to work with ours, we'll call it out again because it just is some of those things that'll get there. So yeah, we do have a cheat sheet. Obviously, we think we're pretty awesome on the actual service provider side of things and kind of speak to our experience there and some of the things we do maybe that are a little bit different. Greg, I don't know if you want to tackle the personalization one specifically. I mean, that's a really good question, I think.
yeah, again, that one, is there too much personalization in email marketing for restricted categories?
I would
Is there such a
say,
thing as?
I would say yes. But I would say that's for every category, right? So I think there is a chance of too much personalization just about everywhere you go because the more personalized you get, I think the more you pigeonhole people, and this is always the challenge with finding that balance. So if I'm shopping for like green sweaters one day and I'm bouncing around and all you do is personalize green sweaters to me. Once I buy a green sweater and you keep personalizing that, I probably don't need a green sweater anymore. So I think with regulated industries, Jordan, you touched on it before, right? Healthcare or diet related type things, right? So if you've got 8 product recommendations that are dynamically populating your emails, and all of a sudden I'm getting all these things on there and it is targeted 100%. I think you run into a bigger risk of someone being like, hey, that's a little creepy for me, or you know a little bit too much about me. And I think there's a really fine line between how much you know about someone and how comfortable they are, how comfortable they are with you knowing that much about them. Uh, so I would say yes, I'd look for areas where you can subtly personalize without making it too much. So if you have product recommendations, maybe just have 2 of them there, or frame it from a different thing. Customers who viewed this also viewed this. It might be relevant to you, but it also phrases it in a broader spectrum. Uh, you know, we see things like product abandonment emails are very effective. There's certain probably regulated industries where, if I'm checking out a diet supplement or glucosamine chondroitin because I've got bad knees over here, right? So maybe I get that and I'm okay with it. I get 3 of those, or I'm getting it for, something a little more, maybe a diabetes, type issue. Those things give me pause a little bit. So I always advise people, it's kind of the consultant's cop out. You know your industry best, you know your audience best. You have a pretty good gut feel of, is this too much? And if you're taking pause, it probably is too much. It's probably a good rule to stick by.
Yeah, I would say how personally engaged with the person are you? Because I think what happens is we think of personalization as an automation, machine learning, auto segmentation sort of thing that we can do in bulk. But when you are talking about step 3 in someone's weight loss journey because of a significant health event, and your only way of communicating that is discount on this thing to deal with your blood pressure or high cholesterol because you almost had a heart attack, and that's your communication. wince a little bit there. It feels a little bit callous. It'd be sort of like you're in the hospital bed and the doctor comes up and does a little promo and holds up this bottle of something, would you like to subscribe now? Free shipping, it's going to sting and it's not going to really work in your favor. So I do think like if you want to lean in on personalization, find ways to be personal in doing that and really adjust your strategy. That means you often will have to send less rather than more. So you may want to avoid sort of mass mailer type content to some of those customers who you are really going to want to personalize towards. This is actually just a strategy thing. Sometimes in our restricted categories, we see like big mass mails going out for a Black Friday promotion and those sort of more personal things that are being hit on in a real segmented way. And that can backfire because you sort of lose the tone, you lose the conversation between you and the customer when you do that. So keep them on the personal side, or maybe pull back and kind of find a balance if you really can't do that very well.
Awesome.
There's that old story from, this is probably 8 years ago now, where Target, they were making all the headlines because they were collecting data from in-store shopping, and they were sending coupons to a teenage girl at her home for childcare stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like prenatal vitamins and stuff. And the parents flipped out because they're like, "Hey, my daughter's a teenager." It turns out she was pregnant,
Yeah.
right? But she didn't tell anyone yet. And it's a grand, like big data type conversation, but the same rules apply, right? Just on a smaller scale. Need to be careful with what you're doing with data.
Yep.
Yeah, another question here. Is there anything we need to be aware of to make sure our emails are ADA compliant, especially if going to government emails and nonprofits?
Yeah, that's a good call out. The answer is yes. And the answer is, as with anything ADI, is how ADA compliant you need to be. Is it depends on usually how big you are. Frankly, the bigger you get as a brand and the more you're doing in terms of revenue, especially, you'll find that you become a more likely target for an ADA claim or an ADA suit. Basically, a lot of the same things that would work for your website should also be used as a standard for your email. One of the real big safeguards that you have to have is for both the website and for emails, have alternative action flows. You'd never want to have something that can only be done by a particular person only through interactions with your website. If you're really concerned about ADA, you want to have alternative channels that work well. And so if there's a discount code and the only way to get the discount code is by clicking on that email and then being on a particular landing page on the site because of that email connection, that could be a potential area of liability that you're creating. And so having sort of alternative pathways. I think that the famous Domino's lawsuit, the trigger for that was that you couldn't use a coupon code that was available online in store or through a phone call. And so they basically had blocked off to somebody who really couldn't navigate their website well. Despite that being part of Domino's accessibility strategy, they could then use it over the phone either. And so if you're in an ADA sensitive spot, especially, make sure you're providing alternative pathways, use the same sort of evaluation standards you have for your website compliance with your email communication. And that'll really help prevent a lot of those suits. And maybe the other one is be proactive in your audits. So one of the big legal things right now is how responsible were you or were you trying to be in terms of ADA? That seems to really adjust the damages that are found inside of ADA suits. So if you're showing that you're really putting a meaningful effort into being ADA compliant consistently over time without lawsuits, it tends to work in your favor. So
awesome. So a few minutes left here. I do want to tackle like automation as well, because that comes up quite a bit. Automation is fantastic when we don't have to keep hiring headcount. Especially I've seen a lot of reduction in headcount over the past like 4 to 5 months here. When we think about automation, is there anything that comes like top of mind when it comes to email?
I'd say use it where you can. So we put out these stats reports last year, like the 25 billion messages. Automated messages drove 37% of all orders on 2% of sends. So they're effective. I think you just need the balance. We talked about like the creepy factor a minute ago with product abandonment messages, which are one of those core 3 messages: welcome messages, abandonment, product abandonment, and cart abandonment. I would say if your product allows it, use the automation where you can, focus on, ADA kind of compliance there. If it's something where I think most people for the regulations and their industries will know, hey, we should not be sending or we can send an abandoned cart here. Just don't do it. Find an alternate path to it. But I would use it where you can. I would say, welcome messages, cart abandonment, product abandonment are those three big ones. They're going to drive over 80% of all those 37% orders. Don't feel you need to go through and do every automation under the sun. Be smart, be logical about them, sacrifice where you need to. And that's where having a good email program just from scheduled campaign segmentation come in more important for you.
I'd quickly flag on automation too. I think if in restricted categories, people are more sensitive working with new providers. So if they've established their trust with you, they've made that purchase, they've given you information, it can be a good idea to think about how to automate your follow-ups there, because those can be really valuable recoveries for additional orders and increase that lifetime value of that customer that you acquired, because that customer does tend to start, our metrics tend to show that they tend to be more likely to purchase with you again and be less likely to shop around if they had that good experience the first time. But a lot of brands just sort of lose sight of that, and they go right back into sort of that mass mail Black Friday sale, and that's not really healthy automation. Think about when someone might be up on the product, when might they be revisiting alternative solutions or alternative products that might address some of their concerns or their particular needs. Kind of have that cadence and start to think about some automations there that would be relevant.
Yeah. So one last question we can get to, and then we can start to wrap it up here. Jordan, I love what you said. Sometimes you have to send less to be more personal. So many marketers send 2 or 3 weekly, if not daily emails. I prefer having a choice. I want to receive versus all or unsubscribe. What is your expert point of view on what the right cadence is, and what is the best day time to send emails? I recently read Tuesdays between 10 and 1 p.m.
Yeah, good questions. I think the right cadence is, it depends. We have one of our fashion brands that sends several emails per day and does very, very well. We continue to test that. We continue to refine that. And we continue to find sort of a multi-email per day is acceptable given their particular product, how they sell it, how they market themselves, and the reasons the customers have ended up. Other brands, especially in regulated, I think it tends to be a little slower moving usually. They're not sort of the impulse buys a lot of times, and so we tend to do a lot less. I would call out age as a really big determinant of that when to send. We find that for audiences that are typically professionals working sort of a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, that sort of Tuesday type of send is a good one, because a lot of people are checking their personal email at work, which is always sort of a funny thing. But they typically, that customer is not necessarily going to be checking Monday. Monday is clear my inbox day. I came in off the weekend and now I've got a bunch of stuff in there. So that can be a dead send. But Tuesdays, Wednesdays can perform really well. But again, that's if your audience is typically going to be sitting down at a desk for a Tuesday, Wednesday type of time frame. If you're dealing with younger audiences, especially college students, sort of 18 plus, you can get away with some pretty random sends. We saw kind of a popular email campaign that went out, and an SMS campaign actually that went out middle of the night. Kind of had a little bit of virality to it, where a mattress company did an SMS. I think it said, I think that the text was, "Hey, you up?" And it was, from one of the big, mattress in a box companies. And it was sent at like 1 a.m. Some people got really annoyed by that, but the whole thought about it was like, hey, if you're awake in the middle of the night, maybe it's your mattress. And so it was kind of an interesting campaign. So I would say, think about your audience, think about your product, and that'll probably tell you when to send more.
Awesome. Well, as we're getting right to the end here, obviously, Greg, Jordan, thank you so much. To everybody who's listening in, there's a reason we had both Jordan, but especially Omnisend on here specifically for this category around regulated industries. Leaders in the space come highly recommended from a ton of brands in the network as a whole. And so if you're looking to evaluate, consider, if you're in this space, in that consideration set, solutions set, I would strongly encourage you to have a follow-up conversation with the team over at Omnisend. More than happy to put you in touch with Greg or anybody else over there. If you need help across the board in the digital space, it could be email, it could be SMS, it could be SEO, it could be web dev. The team at Coalition has been longtime friends of the network, over 7 years now, I think. Jordan, you guys have stayed in here as a highly recommended partner. So I'd encourage everybody, if you want an in-depth conversation on that side, follow up with Jordan and the team as well. But I think, Greg, 30 seconds for key takeaways, and then Jordan, and then we'll wrap this up before 1 Eastern. Sound good?
Yeah. So I would say thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone for spending your time with us today. So big thing for me, understand your audience. You trust your gut. If you reach out to Omnisend, we are super polite. We are super happy and helpful, and we have no problem telling you that we're not the right fit. So we're not going to bring you in and then kick you out 6 months later for no reason. So please reach out to us. We're super friendly, and we'll help you wherever we can.
I think for me, I'd call out some of the things we talked about. I'd say give email and SMS the time they deserve. A lot of marketing budgets and a lot of conversations and how you devote your time and your day as a marketer tends to ebb and flow again based on C-suite pressure, what's trending. Here's the buzzy new marketing channel or ad platform. And email just tends to get neglected. And it's one of those areas where incremental lift tends to be self-repeating when you're doing it right. And it just keeps paying, which is a really fantastic. And so a lot of teams that miss those year-end goals, a big driver of that is what was happening in email. And if you can't sort of connect those dots, you don't know why that's not working, we'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Greg, Jordan, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks everybody for the great questions that came in. With that, we're going to wrap up this webinar. Everybody take care, stay safe, and look forward to having you at a future event. Alrighty. Thanks everybody. Signing off.